When I was a young girl, my dad always told me about the time when he was walking home on a late summer evening. The sun had just went down behind the mountain, blanketing the whole holler in darkness. This was not your typical darkness, but a darkness that was deep enough to feel. The type that made you feel like you were being suffocated. He was walking home with his father from his Aunt Bee's house. She always cooked Sunday dinner for the whole holler. Family or not, you were invited if you lived on Laurel Branch. You were considered family, even if you came from different blood. You were blood bound by the branch. Every Sunday was filled with the laughter of his uncles and great-uncles as they sat together, huddled in the backyard shed. Cigarette smoke made the air hazy as their jokes lingered in it longer than they should. Sometimes, they would pass around a mason jar of shine from Old Opossum from the head of the holler. He wasn't kin, but he was family, like I said. The laughter wasn't the only sounds. It was sometimes drowned out by the angelic singing of Aunt Bee as she made cornbread with her daughter in the kitchen. Sometimes, as my dad played with the other kids, they couldn't keep themselves from running in the kitchen and pulling on Aunt Bee's apron for a quick crumble of the bread before supper. The scent that wafted through the open kitchen window was too enticing for them to ignore. This night was just like those nights that I described. Nothing out of the ordinary, except my dad's mama stayed at home to nurse his sister who had a cold. My dad and his father were not going to miss the mess of fresh squash that Aunt Bee was frying that night. His mama told them to go on. There wasn't nothing they could do. They'd just be bothering his sister coming in and out of the house. They'd just finished up listening to Great Uncle William's last story of the night. It of course ended in some dirty joke that caused him to laugh great big and throw back his knee. My dad was around 15 at this time, and this was the first time he was allowed to spend more than a minute in the shed. Most of the time, he was shooed out by a cigarette-gripped hand and told to go watch his cousins and sister. This time, he was welcomed. He'd even been allowed to get a tiny sup of the shine that Old Opossum had just made. He was walking on air. He never felt so grown up before. His father gave one more wave to his sister and brother-in-law as they began the quarter-mile walk down to the home place. His father was the one to keep the old home place after the grandparents moved in with Aunt Bee to get extra care. They believed it should go to the eldest male, and he took it. He took good care of it too. The little white house stayed spick and span and the yard immaculate. As they walked, his dad loaded him down with the leftovers covered in tin foil that Aunt Bee had insisted they take to his mama and sister. He held the warm foil close to his chest as they went further and further into the belly of the holler. The home place was at the end of the holler, while Bee's was 2 houses down from the top. In between was a thick patch of forest so dense that you couldn't see a star in the sky past the leaves. There was a branch that ran next to the road all the way down the holler that contained a giant boulder on its bank that they called Rabbit Rock. My dad had always called it Rabbit Rock, and his father did too. That's what that middle ground area was to them. His dad cut through the now pitch black darkness by lighting up a hand-rolled cigarette. "Sho, I'm stuffed," he said through the cigarette between his lips. "Me too," my dad replied. "Now don't be telling your mama that I let ye come in the shed for some moonshine, ye hear?" he said as he let out a long breath of smoke. The only thing visible to him was the cherry of his cigarette glowing orange in the deep darkness. "I won't." "Better not, son." He lovingly slapped his shoulder and gave it a hearty squeeze. My dad felt like a man. He felt like he was growing up, and his father knew it. They could connect on a different level now. Something new. They both continued walking in a comfortable silence that was filled with katydids singing their summer song. The darkness was different tonight. The past few nights had been clear of clouds, so the light of the moon could cast a low glow that would slightly penetrate through the trees. This night was clouded, and no light could reach. It was as if an invisible dome that deflected light was placed over the holler, cutting them off from the light of the moon forever. My dad noticed this darkness as they slowly walked into the trees. It seemed to creep up on them like a slow sickness, kind of like the one his sister had right now. He suddenly lost any manliness that he had gained that night. This darkness made him a boy again. A boy who unspokenly walked a bit closer to his father. It felt significantly lonely walking being just the two of them. He was used to his mama and sister walking slightly behind them. Tonight the only thing behind him was a crawling sensation on his back that signaled something might be following him. They trekked deeper into the wooded area, their boots kicking up dust on the dirt road. The further they went, the darker it got. It was to the point that they couldn't see their hand in front of their own faces. The only thing keeping them from running off the road was the familiar feel of the dirt road under their boots. "I'm gonna go out in the tater patch tomorrow to do some weeding and to keep an eye on those tater bugs. They've been eating all over them plants," his dad said, breaking the silence. He puffed on his cigarette, the only light around, shining like a lightning bug. Speaking of lightning bugs, there weren't any. That was odd, and the deeper they went, the less they heard of the katydids and their constant buzz. It was actually gone now. This made the chill climb higher up my daddy's spine. No light from the lightning bugs and no buzz from the katydids made the forest seem dark and devoid of all life. "I'll come help ye," my dad replied, desperate for any noise. Mom!" his father hummed as he continued to puff on his cigarette. "What happened to them katydids?" he asked, not able to hide his nervousness. "They probably went to sleep, I guess. Your granddaddy used to say that a devil was passing through when it gets quiet like this." "You think that's true?" My dad immediately regretted saying this. He knew his father would never let him back in the shed since he believed in tall tales. "Nah! Not unless the devil is a bobcat. That's one thing that can make it this quiet." They continued to walk, but my dad kept that crawling on his back, convinced a bobcat was silently stalking them from behind. He would glance over his shoulder once in a while, but that didn't help any. It was so dark it looked like staring into an oil pit. Thick. Dark. Nothing. Not even a shadow could be cast. They walked in their new silence. A silence that was too quiet and uncomfortable. Suddenly, my dad's darkness was disturbed by a wall. No, not a wall, it was warm, hairy, and filthy. He had run face first into something moving, no walking, the opposite direction. The feeling of matted fur, or maybe even hair, remained on his skin for far too long after losing contact. The smell was the worst, however. It assaulted his nostrils with a pungent odor, a cross between feces and rotten eggs. "Humph!" it grumbled as it hit my dad. It seemed just as surprised as he did. The tin foil leftovers of squash, beans, chicken livers, and cornbread crushed between them, letting a bit fall to the ground. In the blackness, his father was unsure of what happened, but felt the hair and smelled the stench of the thing brush past. This was enough to show him how much danger they had literally run into. This was no animal or human he had ever encountered before. Neither my dad or his had stopped walking during the whole ordeal. The only time they stopped was initial contact. Fear had propelled them both forward. The thing slid by and stopped at the dropped leftovers. It began eating with sickening and obscene noises. Both of them picked up their pace. What my dad was cut off by his father saying, "SHH! Keep walking!" He did as he was told. He held the crumpled leftovers to his chest, the warm juices from the squash and beans seeping into his shirt. They both unspokenly increased their pace, almost to a light jog. They didn't want to draw any more attention to them since it was occupied. They got about 50 feet before they heard its slamming footsteps in the dirt behind them. It was coming towards them. "Drop some leftovers behind you," his dad urged. "What?" "Just do it!" He did as he was told, once again, and threw a couple pieces of chicken behind him. The footsteps stopped and it began its stomach-churning eating again. They picked up their pace again and kept going down the road. They had almost made it through the wooded area and past Rabbit Rock. Another 50 feet had passed before they heard it running with an urgency. It sounded human. Like 2 feet rushing upon them. Like someone trying to attack. "More!" his dad yelled. He threw more chicken and some squash. His arm burned from how hard he threw, hoping to backtrack the beast. More ripping, tearing, and sucking filled their ears from behind. What a slash in this thing? They were at the edge of the forest, almost out of the belly of the beast, they hoped. They could hear it smack its lips and grunt as it finished its last piece. "More! Before it can catch up!" his father urged again as they burst from out of the woods. He fumbled with the foil and grabbed a handful of the mush that it had become. He stopped and slung it as far as he could. This time, with the little light that the uncovered night sky provided, he could see its eyes glow yellow as it stared into his. The eyes jumped from the ground about 7 or 8 feet up as it began to sprint towards the leftovers. My dad felt a primal fear that only his most ancient ancestors could have felt as he yelled, "Run!" They both ran as hard as they could, their boots creating clouds of dust behind them. He had never seen his father run, let alone like this. Heck, he had never seen him scared, but this was something that could scare the hardest and coldest of men. They ran until they saw the low glow of their porch light. My dad threw bits and pieces of the leftovers as they ran, the beast running and stopping, running and stopping. The sound! The smell! Its eyes! Neither of them could stop thinking of it. Finally, they both crossed the threshold and up to the porch. They erupted inside and slammed the wooden door behind them. His mama stood up quickly from her rocking chair. "What in the daylights is going on?" she yelled, a horrified look on her face. "There's some kind of man or animal or something after us," his dad said breathlessly, his unlit cigarette butt still in between his lips. "What are you talking?" His mama was cut off by a loud growl outside. It was like a cross between an animal's guttural groan and a wild man's scream. Everyone looked towards the door. My dad felt his heartbeat quicken and he held the smashed plate of food to his chest. "Mama!" he whispered. That's when they heard it begin clawing and scratching at the foundation of the house. It began ripping and tearing the wood like the way its mouth destroyed the leftovers. "Mama!" he yelled, fear engulfing him completely. He didn't care if this wasn't how a man should act. He was a boy and he would stay that way if it meant being brave in the face of things like him. His parents both looked at each other terrified. He'd never seen an emotion like this on their faces. He didn't know what scared him more, the beast or their faces. His mama ran to the back and grabbed his groggy sister into her arms and came back to put him to her chest. "Joseph! Kill that thing!" she yelled at his dad. "My little gun won't do a thing to it if it in number 39's ripping the house apart." It broke through the foundation and crawled under their floorboards. Beneath them, they could see the boards begin to lift and bend. Everyone was silent as they watched it hunt for food, sniffing loudly like a wild dog. Its stink seeped through the cracks of the floor along with its long, stiff hair. It stuck through the cracks like a porcupine's quills. They watched in horror as the weak boards were the only thing between them and Emmett. Less than /him. "What do we do?" his mama yelled at their dad. "I don't know." "Get your gun!" she screamed. His father ran to the bedroom and returned with his shotgun in his shaking hands. "Shoot it!" my dad screamed. He fired towards it, firing a hole through the floor. The beast let out an inhuman scream. His sister covered her ears and began to sob. His father fired again, another shriek erupting from beneath the floorboards. The beast began to slam itself into the floorboards repeatedly, its hair shooting through and its smell getting worse. Again! His mama screamed. He fired one final time. The beast bellowed in pain once more before it turned and scrambled out the way it came in, crying the whole way. My dad and his family stood there for quite a while, looking at the splintered floorboards, the bullet holes, wondering what just occurred in front of them. They had no words. They had no explanation. They just had fear. A fear far greater than anything they'd ever felt before. It was months before they were outside after dark again. They didn't even go to Aunt Bee's for at least a month. They were too afraid to go past Rabbit Rock into those woods. They couldn't risk another encounter with that thing. They inspected the prints outside their house the next day, but all that was there were boot prints. M3/M sets of boot prints. Each one of their beliefs were altered that night. They never believed in monsters, devils, or haints, but that encounter solidified it for all of them. Everyone they told thought they just had a run-in with a bear and it was too dark to see, but they all knew this was far from a bear, bobcat, or any mountain animal they were used to. From that point on, they had a newfound respect for the forest, the mountain, and the nighttime. They knew they didn't belong out past dusk. Only creatures like that did.